So I am very happy to have join me on the Dairy Dive today, Gabe Camp. Gabe Camp is the owner of Arable Solutions, and Gabe is a partner of ours here at Rob Seco Streamline Ag. But Gabe does a lot of stuff outside of that organization as well, and is a pretty knowledgeable individual when it comes to cover crop. And I had mentioned to Gabe about coming on, and he kind of threw this topic out there, and I think it's really interesting. So before we dive into that, Gabe, welcome to the Dairy Dive, and start off by telling us who you are, where you're located, and a little bit about you and Arable Solutions.
Sure. So we live in Spring Arbor, Michigan, which is in the southern part of Michigan, and currently travel most of the state, including the Upper Peninsula, and then we also go into Ohio, some in Indiana, and our background basically is in seed, but we've done a lot with cover crops over the last, I would say, probably 7-8 years now, and then we're also diving into doing more interseeding and I would say a bulk of our cover crop now is actually going towards some type of a feed or an alternative feed. So, mhm.
I know that cover crops aren't new by any means. I remember, back in my early time with Master's Choice, a lot of meetings we would do. Cover crop was kind of a topic. But what you're specifically going to talk about today, I think, is interesting around the idea of getting the most out of our cover crops, because I feel like in the past it's kind of there. Like it was just a way to maybe government would pay for it, so I just threw it out there, right? I don't think people were necessarily grasping or understanding the benefit behind it. So why does rotation matter more than species selection almost? Or what is the biggest mistake producers are making when they're choosing their cover crops?
Sure. So, the kind of going into the rotation piece of it, which is more important than the species. In some manners, just having cover crops be a part of your rotation. We're trying to we're in more meetings. We're talking to more growers about, if they're a corn bean rotation, now they're a corn bean cover crop rotation, or, whatever their rotation is, we're building that into maybe a fourth crop, a third crop. And being actually more important, because some people, it's just, hey, I'm going to put down cereal rye. I've got some bin run oats. I'm going to throw some radishes in it, and I'm doing something, which they are. But as we get into doing more and more of when we go into what's the biggest mistakes now is that, are we doing enough now? We're already doing it. Are we doing enough? Are we really accomplishing a goal? Do we have a goal? And so I really think that's the biggest mistake some growers have, is some people just do it because, one, the money's there to do it through the government, or two is I don't have a goal, but I'm going to do it just because. And the other thing is the mistake they have is well, I'm going to do exactly what my neighbors are going to do, and I'm going to jump in and put 7-8 different species down, and then they could have a mess on their hands too, because there's a lot of steps involved to make this work good as a system. So
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, because when you think about it's just a byproduct sometimes, instead of really understanding how impactful it is to the whole rotation and the
right.
impact it can have on your crop. That's, I guess, not the crop you're coming out of, but the crop you're going into, for sure. So when you're evaluating a farm system, when you're looking at that kind of rotation idea, when you're evaluating farm system, what do you look at first, Gabe?
Sure. So it's hard to look at something ideally first, but the biggest thing we obviously look at, and it's just kind of a more consistency, is we're looking at what came up. What did it actually look like? That's the first thing we look at, because honestly, that's a big measurement. It's not the only measurement, but it's a big measurement. How did it come up? How tall did it get? Did it fill in the holes? That's what we really look at. And honestly, then when we're doing that, we're going to dig into their root. We're going to dig into the soil. We're going to see how far the roots got. What that, using multi-species and stuff. We're going to look at how deep the roots got, how much root mass there is. and we're going to look at the biomass above, and then probably one step further into that is we're going to actually then test it for your CN ratio, just so we can start identifying a number into it. But so there's really not a first thing, but honestly, Scott, the biggest first thing we run into people, especially that have been doing it maybe 3 years or less, is they're looking at how much biomass do I have? That is the first impression that they want, but we have to actually dig in a little deeper and see what the roots look like, and again, see what kind of CN number that they have, so we can start attaching this to progress.
So, how much does the previous crop influence what you're going to recommend from a cover crop standpoint?
Really, and that was a good question. I was looking at that, and that is a really good question of how it influences, and mainly the major influence it would have is how am I going to put my cover crop on? If I'm coming off of a corn crop and I'm no tilling, and I'm not going to go in there and move any dirt around or till it under, and I'm going to spread it on top. That's going to be kind of a major choice of what am I going to use? How am I going to do it? The other thing is probably your planting time. What that planting time looks like with your previous crop, but those would be two majors. I'm sure there's others out there that we identify, but I think equipment and planting time is probably two things coming off of a previous crop.
So when you think about, the next crop impact, how does the next crop impact termination timing and species choice? How does that next crop get impacted so heavily? And when you think around that, when you're trying to think about that choice, do you think the average farmer is not giving enough thought to what that previous crop or next crop was be impacted by what was previously in that field?
I would say today, most that have been in the cover crops now, let's call it 3 to 5 years, are now looking at that as, how can I build this strategic more into, if I'm going to be planting, if I'm following it with soybeans, I'm going to do this. If I'm following it with corn, I'm going to do this. If I'm following it with maybe some type of a forage crop, I'm going to do this. And so I think we're starting to look at that more, which ideally, I got to say, is more exciting working with those folks, because now we're actually putting that design together, as far as we got to have so much of this and so much of that, as we're building for that next crop. But yeah, definitely, I would say for some beginners that are there right now, I think a lot of what they're focused on is how am I getting that biomass correct? Am I getting enough on? Am I doing it right? And that's probably where they're at. But yeah, looking at what's going to become next, it definitely has to be a part of that plan. I mean, I think, I was just listening to something here earlier in the week. Monday, actually, yesterday, I was listening to something yesterday about, some folks that are just using just your basic radish in a cereal, like a oats or a rye. And, those days are probably past us now. I think in the cover crop, we're looking at more of how we can put, at least 3 products in, 5 products. I have folks that are putting 11 products in. So, and a lot of that's all strategic to whether it's going to be soybeans or corn. And also driven about, what that soil structure kind of looks like.
So when you talk, so let's get into a little more practical aspect of this.
Sure.
So when you're looking at a practical rotation, after early harvest crops, what are some of the key opportunities that tend to be created from that?
So yeah, some of the key opportunities that come into it is, one is that you're keeping your microbial, you're keeping that activity, you're keeping that energy up in the ground. The soil is more alive. The biggest thing I always look at is when you're in a rotation, maybe it's a 2 crop rotation, corn and soybeans, for instance. If you're in a corn and soybean type rotation and you're not doing any cover crops, you really look at that calendar out of 24 months, and you've got about 9 months there where there's just nothing going on in that soil. I mean, yeah, you might have some roots left over from your corn crop or soybean crop, and that's it, but you don't have anything actively growing. And so that right there, the cover crops kind of fills that. When we put those cover crops in, now we can fill that gap in those 24 months. If we're doing a 3 crop when we have wheat in there, we fill that calendar up a little bit more with the wheat crop, but we still have 3, 4 months there that we can, captivate on as far as putting that living root, living crop in there for the microbial activity for the soil, and also just building that biomass. The other opportunity we're doing too is in time. The big thing is roots is a big part of the story in cover crops. The biomass is nice, but the roots are the big story. More root mass and all that is big because it's helping, you know, um, down the road kind of change that organic matter in the soil. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense there. I remember I was at a cover crop specific meeting. This has been a long time ago, and they had a picture essentially. I think it was showing and I don't remember what the even cover crop mix or if it was one crop. I can't remember, but it was showing the amount of roots that had been created from that cover crop, and there was more. The claim was that there was more root mass under the ground than anything above, and
yeah.
then we get so focused on what's above.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, what's been fun is when we do some field days out there, and when we have the time to do it, it's fun to just get somebody that has just a small backhoe and dig down in the ground,
Mhm.
3, 4 foot, and you can get down in there and you can look. We've taken measurements of roots being down in there, 8 to 10 inches, and yeah, that's out of your planning zone, but yet you're actually, what's nice is the more root mass you have and everything else, it's collecting some of that nutrients that are leaving the zone, I call it. They're actually able to grab on and keep that nutrition into suspension. So that's why it is important to have some different layers of roots there. Some roots might only get maybe 6 inches. Some might only get 2 inches. Some might only get a half inch under the ground, but they all play a role in trying to captivate that lost nutrition that we want to still keep into play as long as we can. So
Yeah, makes sense. So what you said made a lot of sense to me as far as on the early harvest crops because yeah, I mean if you take a crop off early, if you didn't put anything down, that you're going like you said 9 months essentially without anything in it. So, but we still have some reasonable expectation that even in a late crop, a fall crop that comes off, there's still benefit and expectation that we can get out of that by putting down a cover crop even over just that winter time, correct?
yeah. Yep. So, like for instance, when we look at if we're able to capitalize on taking a crop off a few weeks early, it might be a silage crop, it might be a soybean that you took off, maybe 3 weeks earlier than expected. And silage makes a lot of sense because that opens up usually about a 3 week to a month window as well. Right there, you just opened up a big conversation or a goal of, hey, I can now fit these 2 or 3 species in here that I'd really like to have in here. And most likely it could be something that's going to pollinate, something that's going to maybe do some type of some of them actually release a fumigant. So, that allows that window time frame sometimes by having a little earlier harvest time for the fall to actually have those species do their job. The other thing is when we look at like after corn harvest, that's been a big conversation, and it's been that big. I don't know. I don't think I can't do it, or because my corn doesn't come off until the first part of November, and I just don't see a big benefit in doing cover crops. And quite honestly, the more research we've done, and the more different species we've looked at, you do have a play there. I mean, there's some folks that are planting wheat in November just because that's what they have to do. Well, you still have, probably 3 to 5 products out there you can put in the ground that would actually, yeah, they're not going to do a lot right then and there, but it's going to lay the foundation to, with the winters we have, we get those winters where last week, we had 50, 60-degree weather, and then it goes back down. You have that opportunity where something can kind of happen in between times. And then in the spring, it comes alive and you have a few weeks. So I really encourage a lot of people after the corn crop, there is a process, there is material out there to use, and I think it really, we've seen a big benefit for those now that have tried it the last 3 years of putting it out there saying, we are seeing something, and they're taking advantage of that window. So
So
mhm.
when you think about as a farmer, I want to make sure one thing I think we want to make sure is to get these farmers thinking is how do I match my goals to the species that I'm going to use? And so, based on kind of that thought process, Gabe, if my goal is soil structure versus nutrient capture versus forage value, what do I need to be thinking of in relation to that? To what crops best benefit my goal?
Sure. So, for instance, an example of a good goal, and it's really, the fun part about what I'm enjoying with what I'm doing with cover crops is that the grower share their goal with me, and then we kind of meet in the middle. They'll say, "This is what I want to do," and then we go ahead and capture it and say, "Okay, well, let's capture as much as we can out of your goal, and then maybe what we have to do is adjust the goal too." But realistically, what we try to accomplish today, and it's where really we're seeing the best results are, is one, we want to capture that nutrition that we're losing, and that's probably in today's marketplace too, it's a big goal. If I can take, maybe I'm spending $30 an acre now on a cover crop process, and I'm just using that as an example number. I want to be able to capture some of that money back, and saving some of that nutrition instead of losing it. The other piece that we're doing with that goal is, yeah, they want to keep the microbial activity. They want to keep the soil alive, which you're doing that no matter what, whether you're using one or you're using 12 different products in a mix. You're doing that by just having something out there. So that's become an easier part of the goal. And then the third part of the goal is in my backyard where I'm at, we deal with a lot of low organic matter, and so a lot of the goal is yeah, I understand that it's going to take years to build that organic matter up, but they're doing it a lot faster by using a multi-species type of a cover crop in there. So that's basically, again, where those goals fall into place is nutrition. They want to also build organic matter, and then they're just looking at keeping that soil alive. Those are the three big goals. And then just to expand on that one more, the next goal we've been getting into now in the past couple of years is actually now developing a rating system, or a number, if you will. Just like you have a yield number on your field, we have like a CN number, a carbon over nitrogen number. We have these other numbers out there now that we're testing for. So that way now people can actually make better adjustments to their mix. So, for example, if they get a certain number on their CN and we have to raise the bar some, that means we might have to put in a little bit more legume percentage in there, or we have to put in a little bit more grass percentage. It's helping us now fine tune how we're dialing that goal in. So
That makes a lot of sense. That's pretty neat. So in that scenario, then I think where the question in my mind naturally goes is, how do I? So if I'm a farmer, how in the world do I evaluate ROI on this stuff? Like, I mean, it's not, in simple, I mean, corn world, right? I know what my input cost is. I know what my bushels are. I know how much I get per bushel. In theory, I can, make a pretty clean connection there. Now, you could argue that there's plenty of parts of that you're not understanding, or that are impacting your ROI. But at
right.
least I can draw a fairly clean line. How in the world do you do that in the cover crop world, Gabe?
Yeah, Scott, that's a good question. And you know me enough. ROI is one of those words that it's always I don't know, a frustrating number, ROI, because we hear that a lot with different things. Everything always has an ROI attached to it somehow, and sometimes it's just not there in a reasonable manner. But it's a struggle right now to evaluate the ROI. I would say it really is in the cover crop world. The forage individuals, the ones that are doing it and they're actually harvesting some forage, it's a very easy to establish that ROI for them, because they're getting that extra, you know, 1 or 2 ton of feed that's just going to help them get through there. So there's a value to that, and so that's actually helping them, close that gap on their ROI evaluation. I think the big part where they're going to see the ROI, and this is where we have seen some of it now, is when we're doing let's put some cover. I have about eight growers throughout the state of Michigan that we've been doing some studies with, and I've been working a little bit with Michigan State on it as well, and we're trying to do some different evaluations of, let's use cover crop here and let's not use cover crop here, and then let's see how our fields are responding to this. And so we are seeing where there is some yield potential there. We're seeing where we're reading a number of, whether we're capturing 2 to 5 more bushel per acre, especially on corn, by where we're using cover crops and where we're not. We are seeing, soybeans, it's a little tougher number, but we are seeing where that is putting in a little play. Usually it's just picking up another bushel or two. But we are seeing where we can measure that now. But the thing is it's a journey. You're going to go on to see that. You're not going to probably put cover crop out the first year and see that. It's going to be something that's going to take you probably 3 to 5 years to establish before you're going to start to see those consistently numbers, raise by using the cover crops. The other ROI that we want to look at too, though, is what does my weed control system look like too? And that's probably another key factor is that are we shading some of these other weeds that we've had problems with out? Are we competing well there with putting the cover crops are? And I think we're seeing that is actually helping some people more on where their cost is for their weed control as well. But again, Scott, it's a hard number. It's easy to sit here and talk about, there's all these benefits out there, but it's going to be a journey to really start to see where you're capturing that return on investment. But on the other side of the coin, the big thing we have to look at right now with using some of the programs that are available, through the NRCS and different programs, they're making the ROI a little easier to capture because there's dollars already there to use. And I want to say, I think the biggest thing we have to look at as our world changes, as economies change and different things, we have to make this program sustainable to where if there was no programs available out there, would it still be worth doing? And that's the part that we really have to be careful on. And we really have to make sure that growers understand that goal, because just recently we were in a situation here, 3-4 months ago, or where we were at early fall, where we may not have had any dollars for cover crop, and were they going to do it or weren't they going to do it? And people that have been doing it for a while decided, what, I'm going to do it whether it's available or not. And so I think that's the biggest piece we have to get to. But again, it's going to be a journey. You're going to look at 3 to 5 years to really establish that solid, good return on investment.
Yeah. I think where my head goes in hearing you describe that, Gabe, is I think what the farmers got to think about is when it comes to cover crops, I'm building a house. I'm not just moving in a mobile home, right? Or a trailer, right? It's going to take time. It's got to build the foundation and layer and just work on it and continue to look at soil samples and evaluate. It didn't lose organic matter overnight. You're not going to get it back overnight.
Yeah.
And so it's a process. And so I think working with someone like you and individuals who have a passion and understanding of how these rotations work best is extremely important.
Right. Well, back in December, I met with, I had a group of growers that we've been working with for quite a while, and most of them we've been working together for, I would say 7+ years, 7 to 10 years for most of them. And, I just sat down with, I believe there was 5 that met up with us, and we just kind of had a little round table and met up for lunch, and we talked about things. And, the consistency thing we heard from those folks is that, my yields are more consistent. My yields are growing, and they're just more consistent. And so, and they contributed some of that to their cover crop program, because they, most of those that were there out of the 5, I want to say at least 3 of them, they do that evaluation where they're not using cover crops in some areas. I mean, they're going to start transforming into, I'm going to do cover crops everywhere now, but we needed to have a measurement of where we're using it and where we weren't using it and what it was responding to. And I think now they've convinced themselves that they're seeing, their yields becoming more consistent. And so, that to me, is a great accomplishment for those growers. And again, it didn't happen overnight.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Gabe. Any final thought as we wrap it up here? Maybe if you were going to challenge a producer to change or evaluate one thing, or any other big area that we may have missed, what would that be?
I think the biggest thing I would challenge, the growers out there to look at is again, look at your goal. Whether you're using, if you're feeding cattle, for instance, and you're looking at wanting to produce more feed, so you have some more feed, some more beneficial feed too. I mean, using the cover crop system and putting a mix together that can really put a lot of protein in your favor very quickly. Again, it's not going to be that 8, 10, 12 ton at a time or 6 ton at a time. It's going to be more of your, a ton or two at a time, but very much protein rich. And then also, build your soil up at the same time. I think that looking at a cover crop program is nice to start somewhere, whether it's 20 acres or 40 acres and get started. Also, again, the big thing I always warn everybody is that make sure you understanding your goal is, do I want this to overwinter or do I not want it to overwinter? Because that, I can tell you, a lot of people got chased off from cover crops, the first couple times they did it, because it overwintered. They weren't prepared. Next thing you know, they were spending another $20 to $30 an acre to try to, terminate the crop. So I think that's another reason why you want to really sit down with somebody that has some experience that can walk you through those and make that determination of, what do I want that to look like. I mean, I wouldn't be afraid of overwintering. It's just, you want to lay that plan out of what you want it to look like, because a lot of people overwinter, they can take care of it. It's just about how much of certain things that you're going to use. And then, the ones that winter terminate, make it pretty simple. You still capture some time frame. And so yeah, I think that's a big thing to just kind of look at, to maybe change someone's mindset.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, Gabe, for taking the time. Really
Yeah,
appreciate you coming
thank you.
on. If someone's got some more questions, maybe they're located in Michigan or in the kind of your general geography and has some more questions on cover crops, or they just want to reach out to you as an expert, what's the easiest way for them to do that, Gabe?
Easiest way is just to call or text. I mean, that's usually the easiest. And my phone number is 517-581-8418. And yeah, feel free to give me a call, and we can work together on some different programs. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Gabe. So hopefully you guys will reach out to Gabe. Be looking at this for your operation, regardless whether you're just straight row crop or you're working in the dairy, beef industry. Either way, we need to have better return. We need to be able to maximize our land because it's awful darn expensive. And so we need to get as much out of it as we can. So
Yeah.
with that, make sure to subscribe to the Dairy Dive. Make sure and check out some of the other Rob Seco social media platforms. You can see some more content there: LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, all those different areas as well. So with that, we will sign off. Hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you.